I'm sitting on the concrete stairs outside of a psychiatric hospital in the middle of downtown Toronto. I've just left a young lady who's 14 years old, who's very tiny and very innocent, off at that psychiatric intake, and I felt powerless. You see, during the week, I was an economist. I worked at a multinational corporation in uptown Toronto, and on weekends and sometimes at night on the weekdays. I worked at a street youth center. And that day, I had gone to the street youth center, and I met with my dear, dear supervisor, Jim. And he said, now that we've promoted you from volunteer to part-timer, I've got a task for you. I want you to escort this young lady, her name is Angel, to the hospital. It's going to be about 15 minutes. You're absolutely not to make any physical contact. And you're not to talk about anything deep because she already has a caseworker. So I said, okay. Now, she called herself Angel, likely for the same reason that a lot of those girls called themselves Angel, which was that they probably needed one. And I remember that she told me she had left home about 2 weeks ago, only to come to almost an equally nefarious place, the downtown streets of Toronto. And we were off. We started walking, she and I, and within probably 30 seconds of our walk, she said to me, do you know what my father and my brother have done to me? And I said, no, and she told me. And there was physical abuse and emotional abuse and sexual abuse, and it was heinous, extremely difficult. And I put my arm around her, and I held her hand, and we talked about deep stuff. So my heart definitely won over my training, but it affected me. And I left her off at the intake, and I walked away, and I thought I'd, skip back to the street youth center. But instead, what happened was that I was overwhelmed by thinking about all of the thousands of street youth there were. And then I thought about all the, street youth that grew up to be adults on the streets. And then I thought of all the thousands of cities all over the world, and it was overwhelming. And I thought to myself, well, gosh, what more could I do? And that's when I sat down. And then I thought, well, even if I did do something, how's that going to matter? I'm one person. And then I thought, this problem is so overwhelming and complex. How would I ever know where to start anyhow? And I got to tell you, I feel a lot like that today about the world and what's going on. And so I'm really curious. Even though I can't see you, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. First of all, how many of you have felt like, you'd love to do more? You would just love to do more in these times of so much going on. Yeah, right? Secondly, how many people have had the thought, even if I do more, I'm like a drop in the bucket. Like it's just, yeah. And thirdly, how many of you have felt like the problems right now in the world are so darn complex and overwhelming, you wouldn't even know where to begin anyways? Yeah. So that feeling of overwhelm is a thing. It's called empathic distress. It was coined by psychology researchers. That feeling of empathic distress puts us into fight or flight, which is based in the amygdala of the brain. And when you're in fight or flight, all you're looking for is ways to survive. Like, how can I stay safe? That's the question you ask. How can I protect myself? How can I stay in control? And the answers you are vigilant for are the same way. You're looking for answers that will keep you safe, because that's the question you're asking. That's what's driving the bus. So when we are in that place, we want to go maybe cocoon in our houses or take care of our families or do what's really familiar. And we want to go back to a place where we have agency, where we feel in control. But most of all, we stop asking the question, what can I do? And I get that, don't you? I mean, I've felt that, I've lived that. I started asking myself, how can we get from that place of being so overwhelmed? Can we use that state of overwhelm to actually catalyze us as opposed to paralyze us? Well, the answer is yes. However, at my young 25-year-old life at the time, I had no idea how to answer that question, but I wanted to know. So I actually left my job at the big multinational company. My parents were disappointed. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to study with sociologists. I'm going to study with psychologists. I want to understand from a psycho-spiritual level. I even studied with physicists. I went to Ecuador. I went to Peru. I went all over the world. And I developed a body of work that actually takes all that information and turned it into something pragmatic so that people could get out of that place of the amygdala, of that fight or flight. But it's not just that. They'd be able to use the brain science and turn it around to be able to thrive. And that wouldn't have happened without my little angel. And so the first place that I thought to look, as I was going on my journey, and it is a journey, was agency. Agency. All right, so I was in Arizona and I was doing a talk called Get Out of Your Own Way. And it was all about getting out of your own way enough to be able to have the power to act. And after this talk, there's this 11-year-old and he's waving his arm. And before I could even call on him, he said, Jennifer, why don't the people in power do something about what is going on in the world? And my response to him was, the problem is not that the people in power are not doing something about what's going on in the world. The problem is that you think they're the ones in power. And so I remember thinking to myself, gosh, I wonder what would have happened if he had agency. Because at that point, he was giving his power away to people he thought had more money or more socioeconomic status. He probably learned it from his school or, I don't know, one of his parents, who knows. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, what if he'd asked the question from a place of not his amygdala, but of that place of thriving forward? Because you can't move the needle on life. You can't change anything. You just keep going around in circles in survival. How do you make change? And what would have been the question that he could have asked? I thought to myself, if only he'd asked, what can I do with my life right now to see a difference in the world that I don't have to wait for anybody else? Can you guys feel the difference in the question? So then I was like, okay, all right. So the next step of this, if you have agency, then you gotta kind of have this feeling of being a conscious being with choice. Because in order to stop yourself from going down on that speed train of overwhelm, where you're in your amygdala, you have to be able to notice it and then choose your way out of it to face forward. You get what I'm saying? So what happened was I decided to do an informal study. It was an informal study of my clients, my friends, certainly some of my colleagues who were doing things in the world. But these were people that were doing everything from always connecting with the cashiers in the grocery stores to one of my favorite people in the world who implemented Earth Day Canada. And everyone in between, my friend who collected hundreds of presents and still does for Christmas for children whose families can't afford Christmas presents. But it was more the everyday thing. So I wanted to know, why did these people have agency? Why are they different? How did they shift? Because they were constantly facing forward. And they were from every walk of life, every race, every height, every country. And so the first question I asked them in my study was, are you special? Like, were you ordained? Did the clouds part and God said, you are the one? and their answer was, no. No. They had acne, they had pimples, they had hard upbringings, they had easy upbringings, it wasn't about that. It led to the second question, which was, well, what had you even start? And they said, well, I had something happen that really struck my heart. I witnessed, clear cutting, or I witnessed someone on the streets, or I witnessed someone going without Christmas presents when I always had so many. And sometimes it happened when they were 12, and sometimes it happened when they were 25, and even at 50. But it struck their hearts, and it changed them. And they sought some kind of counsel like I did to try to get some information to empower them. The next thing that happened was question number 3, which for me was the very best question. I asked, so why do you keep going? With everything that's happening in the world right now, why the heck do you persist? And each of them said, without exception, the reason I persist is because of what's going on in the world. This gives me peace. It gives me a sense of satisfaction. It helps me wake up in the morning knowing that I can make a difference for at least one person. It actually energizes me. So with the way the world is now, I do it more. And I thought, wow. And as I listened to them, I realized that there was a question driving the bus of their life. And the question was, what is a contribution that I can make with the skills that I have that would have me waking up in the morning inspired, going to bed at night satisfied that I made at least one person's life better or the world better? It lived them, it breathed them. I told them the question, and they said, yeah, if there was a question living me, it'd be something like that, but they didn't ask it consciously. It really struck me, and I thought, wow, what if everyone started doing that? So in my process, I learned a few things. One was that, of course, we all have agency. We do have agency, whether we recognize it or not. The second thing is that not only do we have agency, but we also are sovereign, conscious beings that have choice, no matter what's going on in the world around us. All of these people that I interviewed, they all went through divorces and people died and, stuff happened in their life. They had a normal life. They just woke up asking a question of themselves. But the third thing I found really interesting is that every single one of them felt like their own personal movement. They were like a movement of one, but they weren't because, of course, they hung out with people that were doing things in the world, but they really took it on themselves Now, there's a movement of one, like one, and then there's a movement of one, isn't there? And so I thought to myself, okay, this is good. I was talking in a moment of despair to my professor of physics, and I asked him, I feel like what I do doesn't matter. And he said, Jennifer, you might be a drop in the bucket, but let's make it even worse. Let's make you a drop in the ocean. I said, what? And he said, well, if one molecule in the ocean moves, every other molecule in the entire ocean must move. A movement of one is a good thing. And I got to tell you, when Angel decided to leave her home, she was a movement of one. And that movement of one helped me, catalyzed me to help over 30,000 people live the life that they love from all over the world. One little angel. I didn't finish my angel story yet. I was in downtown Toronto again. I was emceeing an event at a big, huge cathedral. And as I was emceeing the event, what happened was I was in view, walking into the church, of the place where I had left Angel off. And there was a break where the person doing the main part of the event wasn't available. She had a wardrobe malfunction, so I had to fill space. And I decided to tell the Angel talk, and everybody cried, and I cried, and then people said, whatever happened to Angel? And they said, were you ever in contact? And I got kind of sad because I realized I never did get in contact. I left that youth hostel and all that kind of stuff. I never found out. And I walked out of the building a little bit like, And as I walked out, this woman runs up to me and she squares her shoulders to me and she goes, Jennifer, my name is Sue. I go, hi, Sue. And she said, a couple of years before you met Angel, I was also on the streets. I lived on the streets of Toronto. And I said, oh, that's so interesting. And she said, no, you don't understand. There was a woman who held my hand, who listened to me unconditionally, and she changed my life. I got a job, and now I have a home and a family. And I thought, Angel's molecule, my molecule, this woman now is telling me. And then it all hit. Okay. So what if we're all movements of one? And I'm wondering what would happen if we all woke up. Tomorrow morning, and maybe every morning after that, asking the question, what is a contribution I can make with the skills that I already have? That would have me getting up inspired and going to bed satisfied that I made someone else's world or the world in general a better place. So this is an invitation. Because after all, that nebulous they out there aren't the ones in power, are they? Thank you.